Today I have more phrasal verbs with on, and I hope to remind you about some of the phrasal verbs which came up in the previous lesson and previous lessons. So let's start with boning up on some of these phrasal verbs. You'll notice that all of them are made of up on, and they all involve revision, repetition of old schoolwork or old study in order to remember something. If you bone up on phrasal verbs, it means you read as much as you can about phrasal verbs and study them and do lots of exercises in order to practice them. You are trying to brush up on your phrasal verbs. A lot of people are aware of this phrasal verb. It means when you try and brush up on your English skills, you try to repeat them. You try to repeat lots of exercises, read lots of English, listen to English in order to brush up on your English skills. So they're very similar. Bone up on, brush up on, swat up on is the same. A swat is somebody who does all their homework. It's kind of quite negative, strangely enough, but someone who does all of their homework and does as much work for the teacher as is possible so that they know everything about the subject. So swat up on is the same as bone up on, and read up on is exactly the same as the other three. It just, the emphasis is on reading, and so it's when you read in order to familiarise yourself with an old topic. So all of them involve revision, basically. That's what they are. They all involve some kind of revision. Now, lessons can drag on. I think I mentioned this one in the last lesson, can't remember, so let's do it again anyway. Lessons can also wear on, which means that they go on too long because they're a little bit boring, maybe. Quite often it's because they're boring, and I think this is connected to plough on. If you're having a really boring time doing an exercise, but you want to finish it, because maybe once you've finished your homework you can go out and have fun with your friends, you might say, right, let's plough on and get it finished as soon as possible. Plough on means continue with a boring task, but a lesson drags on. A meeting can wear on for 5 hours. So both of these are very similar, and you can say the meeting went on for 3 hours, meaning the meeting lasted 3 hours. So remember that this is connected to all those phrasal verbs, keep on, carry on, go on, which relate to continuing something. Walk on, play on, they all relate to continuing something. Okay, if somebody picks on you, then they are bullying you. So picking on someone means to bully someone. It's not a nice phrasal verb here. So I hope nobody picks on you at school, but if they do, then it means that they say nasty things to you, they make rude comments, they like annoying you, they like keeping on at you about your weaknesses or your bad traits. So this brings us on to the next phrasal verb, which is to go off on one. If you go off on one about something, it's the same as going on about something. It's very similar to all of these which we studied in the previous lesson. Keep on at someone about something, bang on about something, rabbit on about something, ramble on about something. But when you go off on one about something, it means you start to talk about something very angrily, and that's the point. You're angry when you do this. And yeah, you just start speaking very, very energetically, usually it's angrily, about something. It's when you start going on about something. So this one's related to those ones we did before. So is this one. If you don't want to let on, and this has no object, it means you don't want to reveal a secret. You don't want to let others in on your secret. You should remember this from the previous lesson. You don't want to let the cat out of the bag. There's an idiom here which is related to our phrasal verb, and I think it's very useful to memorize idioms at the same time because very often they're related to the phrasal verb. For example, we did rub in on in phrasal verbs, and I told you that it's similar to rubbing salt into the wound. I think rubbing salt into the wound can help you remember rub something in because it's the same. It's the same as the idiom. And if you don't want to let on, you don't want to let the cat out of the bag. You don't want to reveal your secret. Okay, get on can mean many different things. If you say, how are you getting on? It means, how are you progressing? If you say, he's got a lot of wrinkles, he's getting on, it means he's getting older. I've got some grey hairs here, so I'm getting on nowadays. I'm no longer a young man. And you can also talk about it getting later with getting on. You can say, it's getting on a bit. Perhaps it's time we turned in. Yeah, remember turn in for go to bed. It's time we turned in. It's high time we turned in. That would mean that it's getting too late. It's time to go to bed. So yeah, get on can mean get later. And by the way, related to turn in is another phrasal verb called tuck in. Because when you take the children to bed, you often tuck them in, which means to put them under the sheets and make sure they're warm and comfortable and that they're going to go to sleep. Tuck in can also just mean to tuck in your t-shirt or your shirt like that. That's what you do. When I was at school, if you didn't have your shirt tucked in, there was a teacher who would certainly shout at you and say, tuck your shirt in. Anyway, just another phrasal verb with in, not with on, but it just suddenly dawned on me that I hadn't mentioned it in any other video, and it was really common when I was young. Okay, if you fall back on something, it means you use something as a last resort. That's the point. You use something as a last resort. So you resort to something. That would be another phrasal verb, really, or at least verb and preposition, which is very similar to fall back on. So maybe you don't have any money when you're a student, so you have to fall back on your parents' help. And you basically have to resort to your parents for cash. And I think that this fall back on is related, well, it's similar to get by on or live on. This means to manage with or survive on. So if, as a student, I managed to get by on a lot of junk food when I was a student, which means I survived on a lot of junk food. I lived on a lot of junk food. Without the junk food, I wouldn't have been able to survive. So get by is kind of like just about manage to make ends meet, just about manage to survive if you'll get by. It's very similar, and you can also get by on something. Okay, if you're a business and you take on new employees, you employ new people. So to take someone on is to offer them a job. But it can also have a second meaning, to take something on or to take someone on. If you take on a new project, it can mean accept a new responsibility, accept some kind of new duty, or accept some kind of new responsibility. So if you decide to take on a new role at work, it means you accept that responsibility. And we also have a phrase called bring it on, which I mentioned in phrasal verbs with bring as a way of ascribing a cause. Yeah, the bad weather has brought on an epidemic. But you can also say bring it on. And when you say bring it on, I think this is very common in popular culture, in new films and things like this. If a character says bring it on, it means I accept the challenge. Bring it here, I am ready to take on that challenge. Okay, so take on has that other meaning of accepting a challenge in some way.